Alright, well, I know I've done this already for the stream, but for the purpose of the YouTube video that'll be coming out later. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. This week we are in Miami for round 2 of Season 6 of the FVC F1 Championship. We have 15 drivers here today. We have an 18-minute short qualifying session to decide who will start on pole position for the Grand Prix later on. We've got a couple of drivers out already. D7 in the Mercedes. Both Mercedes. No, just the one. No, it is both Mercedes. We've got Sass in the Aston, Alexi in the McLaren. There's Scarlett in the Ferrari out as well. Apex and his teammate for this week, Ben Hausman, also out on track. Let me get my mini-map up. So it looks like the first person that's going to be starting their flying lap will be Dorado in the Mercedes. All the drivers currently out on track on the soft compound tyre, of course. This will be Dorado, followed by Scarlett, followed by Apex. Let's see what Dorado can do as the first driver across the line. Through the final sector now. Onto the start-finish straight he goes to start his lap. DRS open. Smooth through the first couple of corners, a little out of shape on that curve there. Dorado not pushing it too much, just trying to get a banker lap on the board before they start pushing for times later in the session. And there is a yellow flag just behind for one of the Aston Martins. They have got going again. Through up to the chicane he goes. Leaving a little bit of time on the board through the chicane. Nice exit out onto the straight. Momentarily had purple second sector there, but it has already been taken by one of the drivers behind him. We have a late joiner in OJ English. And I believe it could actually be raining. I think I see some spots of rain coming down as well. If anybody has the weather forecast, feel free to drop it in chat. And it is 1:27.7. Times keep getting beaten. It's D7 currently provisional pole. Next across the line will be Jim Bobster in the Alfa Romeo. What can he do? So 1:29.1 for Jim Bobster. Time's coming in very fast now. Ben Hausman has retired from the session after only the one lap. And it is a crash. He is in the wall there in the first sector. Not what Ben would have wanted there. Having the pace to potentially challenge for pole position. And he's out after only one lap. It's Bayliss currently on provisional pole, 27.6. You see there is definitely rain falling on the track now. All drivers still out on the soft tyre. Trying to set a lap time on those softs before the track gets too wet for slick tyres. If they can set a good banker on softs now, they might be able to take pole still. There's a bit of a traffic jam here with Blah Yapper in the Haas, and I believe potentially Scarlett in the Ferrari. No, it's going to be Boise in the Ferrari. Bit of a traffic jam there in Sector 2 for those two drivers. There's still a yellow flag in Sector 3. Looks like it's potentially Jim Bobster in the Alfa Romeo that's caused that. He's invalidated his current lap, but he is going for another attempt. Message in chat there saying contact between Ben and Finnell, possibly leading to the DNF there of Ben. That is not what he would have wanted. Oh, and a big slide there for Jim Bobster. These conditions proving very tricky for the drivers. We're probably not going to see too many more improvements on times now. There is another yellow flag in Sector 3. It will be for Bayliss. Possibly preparing for his next flying lap. No, he's coming into the pits. There's a couple of drivers left out on track now. You've got Jim Bobster, Alexi, Finnell, and both the Alpines of OJ and Salmon Baker. Neither of who have set a lap yet. This is not the ideal time to be trying to set your first lap when there's rain falling on the track. Very greasy track conditions right now. Soft's still potentially the preferred tyre over the intermediates for now. And there is an Aston Martin out on track. It is Saskia Moll that's out on track, currently with a 1:32.3. On a lap at the moment, what can they do? Can they improve their time to get up the order? Oh, and another big slide there from the Alpine of OJ, almost into the wall at the chicane. You see these drivers being so careful on the throttles through these long corners. But it is a purple Sector 1 currently for Salmon Baker. This is looking like a very good lap indeed. Okay, the rear wheel's spinning up there as they get on the throttle. You have to be so easy on the throttle and the brakes here. These are not the ideal conditions. You see there's just about a dry line on the circuit at the moment. How much longer is that going to stay for? Still, we have the McLaren of Bayliss on provisional pole with a 1:27.6. A few more drivers coming out for another lap now. Will be Salmon coming across the line to finish their first lap. It's only a 1:32.6 that puts them 15th and last place for now. Have we reached that crossover point already? I don't suspect we'll see too many improvements, if any, on qualifying times for now, as the rain is set to remain for the remainder of this session. Rain for the rest of quali, race is dry. I imagine most of the drivers will have stayed with a dry setup for the race and just suffered a little bit in quali. A couple of drivers potentially going for that compromise setup to get a bit more speed in qualifying to put them in a better position for the race. So Jay English now to cross the line to finish their first flying lap. And they invalidate on the final corner. That is not what the Alpine driver would have wanted. An invalidation on the final corner of their flying lap there. We have Scarlatti now coming across into the third and final sector, coming to the start-finish straight. Now they're on an out lap, preparing for a flying lap here. Sitting in third position with a 1:27.9, just trying to get some heat into those tyres. Locking the brakes into turn one as well. A big slide and a nice save there from Scarlett. Coming through turn 3. Another big slide into the wall, no! That's Scarlett out of qualifying there after a big crash. These conditions really not ideal for the drivers. Rain is falling heavily on the circuit now. Some still trying to brave it on softs. That's a 5-place grid penalty for the Aston of FV Pixels for a collision with his teammate. And that's Pixels retired from the session as well. Can we see damage to the other Aston? Looks like they're okay. Moving out of the way there for the Williams of potentially Finnell coming through. So J English back into the pits. No lap time set for them so far. Top 3 remain unchanged and Saskia Mole retires from the session. That's both Astons out of qualifying. 12th and 14th for them on the grid. Apex out on the intermediate tyre at the moment. P6 for them currently with a 128.8. What can they do on the intermediate tyres? They look like the first driver that's gambling on the intermediate tyres. Locking the brakes into the final corner. Almost into the wall there. And a spin. Oh, spin for Apex at the beginning of the lap. They'll pull into the pits now to abort. That's not what they would have wanted. So your top 3 remains unchanged. It's Bayliss from D7 from Scarlett. All in the 27s. Just under 3/10 separate the top 3 currently. It's Broughton in 4th and Blah Yapper in 5th. Jim Bobster out on the intermediates at the moment. Currently in 7th with a 129.1. What can they do? You can see the car absolutely on the limit through there. Sliding all the way through, losing a lot of time in the chicane. Wheel spin on the exit of the chicane as well. It compromises them onto the straight. With 5 minutes left in the session, I believe we've seen all the improvements that we're going to see. I think even on intermediate tyres, drivers are going to struggle to even match the times they were doing on the softs in damp conditions. There's still drivers out there trying to go for a lap, just to see if they can improve. There's Finnell retiring from the session as well. That's 13th for the Williams of IX Finnell. Just 2 laps under their belt, the best being a 131.6. Currently in the middle of the 2 Astons. And it's still bottom of the pile for the 2 Alpines of Salmon and OJ at the moment. You see their race control DRS disabled. If it wasn't already going to be tough to match the times, it definitely will be now without the help of DRS down the straight. There's a message from Pixels saying that himself and Sass are going to provide entertainment. I am very concerned for what form of entertainment they might be talking about. And that's a retirement from Alexei as well. Just coming into the second sector. Is that a crash? Right on board with Eldorado, we may just see the remainder of that stranded McLaren, unless it's already been taken away. Looks like it has, unfortunately. And there's the lap aborted from Eldorado. See a wheel in the middle of the circuit there, presumably from the McLaren of Alexi. Is OJ English retiring as well? There's a yellow flag in Sector 1 as it looks like D7's retired, potentially crashed into the pit wall by the looks of things. Not too many drivers remaining. And of those drivers that are still in this session, not too many of them are on track, as that's an invalidation from Eldorado. Just a wheel over the line at the chicane and that lap will be invalidated. You see Bayliss, your provisional pole sitter, just sitting comfortably inside pit lane. Done one lap on the softs and got a 27.6. Still top of the pile, no need for him to go out and risk trying to set another lap. There's movement in the Mercedes garage as Eldorado will come back into the pits. You still have Broughton out there on the softs as well. All other drivers currently utilising the intermediate tyre, but you still have Broughton trying to brave it on the softs. You see the track is now completely wet. No dry line at all visible on the track now. You see the spray coming off of the car as he goes down the straight. Very close to the wall there through the final sector. And to the line they come. As expected, no improvement. 12 seconds off the best. Lap times now in the 40s. There's a yellow in Sector 1 there for Boise and the Ferrari, backing it into the wall. Looks like they may have just avoided damage. That is qualifying over, so your top three is Bayliss, D7 and Scarlett, all separated by just under 0.3 of a second. As we see Broughton drifting down there through Sector 2, being chased down by Boise and the Ferrari. This will draw our qualifying to a close. So we see a lot of the drivers just drifting on track at the moment. There's been a crash there for Apex. There's no front wing left on that Red Bull. His lap is invalidated as well. Oh, just to finish it off, he slams it into the wall there in Sector 3. That Red Bull wasn't battered enough already, it's definitely battered now. There we are, all the drivers have taken the checkered flag and the qualifying is over. It's 5th place for the Haas of Bla Yappa. Then we see our driver grid here. Pole sitter is Bayliss, followed by D7, Scarlett in 3rd, Broughton, Blygapper in 5th, Apex in P6, Jim Bobster in 7th, Alexi in 8th, Eldorado in 9th, and rounding out your top 10 is Ben Hausman, who's returning as a reserve today to sub in for Apex's missing teammate, who is not racing with us this week. Outside the top 10, we have Boise in the Ferrari, FV Pixels in P12 with a 5-place grid penalty for a collision with their teammate. P13 belongs to Finnell, 14th for the second Aston Martin of SAS, 15th for Salmon Baker, and 16th for OJ, who did not set a lap during qualifying. Here we are, ready for the formation lap. And it is, as we suspected, dry race, at least for the start. Here we are at the predicted race strategies on the grid, either a 1-stop or a 2-stop, mediums, hards, or soft, medium, median. Let's see what tyres our drivers have elected to start on. We have Apex on the softs, the only outlier there. 3 drivers on the hards. Ben Hausman, Finnell, and OJ English on the hards, the rest of the grid on mediums. Suspecting a potentially a really good start from Apex there on the softs, but they will die off very quick, as we know, especially around Miami. So on top of that, potentially much better start than the medium runners around them, they will be one of the first ones to pit to change tyres. We are drivers weaving down the straight, trying to get any temperature they can into the tyres before the start of the race. Coming through the 3rd and final sector now, running the last couple of corners. It will be Bayliss that lines up in pole position. Broughton lining up in 4th after a good race out for them at Brazil last time. What can they do this time? All the drivers pulling into their respective grid spots. We see FV Pixels in the Aston Martin now starting last because of that grid penalty they picked up in qualifying. And Alexi has been disqualified. Not the ideal start from the McLaren. As the last of the drivers pull into their pit box, we should see the lights come on. It's 5 lights. And it's lights out and away we go for the Miami Grand Prix. It's a good start from Bayliss. D7 pulling alongside, down the inside into turn 1. There's a lunge there from Apex on the Ferrari. There's contact behind. Broughton's down 3 places from 7th. There's a yellow flag. It looks like the Aston Martin of SAS that spun into the in the first sector. They have got going again, but potentially damage. And that's Bayliss round. That is your race leader and pole sitter Bayliss round in the 2nd sector on the first lap. That is not what they would have wanted at all. Also losing out is Ben Hausman, and Broughton losing 2 places as well. As predicted, a great start from Apex, up 3 places now into 3rd. One of your biggest movers as well is Salmon Baker in the Alpine, up 5 positions now. Apex into 2nd now as well. Scarlett coming with the fight back. And there's another yellow flag. It looks like Boise in the Ferrari has been spun as well. see D7 pulling an early lead on the field. Being chased down by Apex in P2 and Scarlet in P3. It's the fastest lap now for D7 to 1:34.2. Scarlet getting very close to Apex there. Tucked in right behind that Red Bull, trying to get all the slipstream they can through this fast section. And we're under a virtual safety car. And that's Dorado, the Mercedes of El Dorado that's had what looks to be an off somewhere. You see Boise into the pits, Houseman as well. I don't see too much damage on that Mercedes, potentially just running wide, but what caused the virtual safety car? See Jim Bobster now in fourth, dropped quite a way off that leading trio. At one point at the start there, Jim Bobster was actually chasing Scarlet for P3, but they've now dropped a fair way off the back of that trio. They have all closed up in front. Scarlet still right on the back of Apex, all drivers keeping to that reduced delta for the virtual safety car. You see a good start there for the Aston of FV Pixels from last on the grid to P11, up 5 positions. And the two Alpines also very good starters as well, up 6 positions for OJ English and 7 for Salmon Baker. Apex up 4 positions now, and a drive-through penalty for the Aston of Saskia Moll. Speeding under VSC. Penalty there for Ben Houseman as well. As we go green again, there's another 5-second penalty for Sas for speeding in the pit lane. And it is a drive-through as well for Houseman. You see D7's got a great launch away from that virtual safety car. He's pulled a 2.5 seconds on second place already. Scarlet and Apex still fighting very closely. Jim Bob's now closed in on the leading pack. Broughton still on the back in P5. And it's a lunge from Jim Bobster. Up into P3. Scarlet's taking it back on the inside line. They're still too wide coming into the chicane. Scarlet will have the inside line. There's contact. Oh, Jim Bobster gets squeezed. Still too wide all the way through the second sector. Now Broughton and Blah Yapper all sitting right in that queue, all trying to fight for the top positions. Broughton is past Scarlet. Scarlet down to P5. Scarlet now back down the inside of Broughton, potentially. No, the Williams stays ahead. You see that Ferrari right on the back of the Williams now. They're too wide into turn 1. Broughton is past Jim Bobster, up to P3 now. Scarlet wheel to wheel with the Alfa Romeo of Jim Bobster. Jim will have the inside line into the next corner. But Scarlet keeps ahead. It looks like Jim Bobster's run wide. That Jim is spun. A rejoin there in contact with the Haas of Blah Yapper. They both spin. We were getting treated to such a nice battle in front there. You see a large amount of separation now up ahead. You see these two are still stuck together after their contact. Jim Bobster and Blah Yapper. There's a slide there for the Haas of Blah. Potentially damage to that Haas. A nice recovery from Bayliss. Now ahead of their teammate Alexi, up into P8. And a nice drive from FV Pixels. He's getting hunted down by Dorado currently for the final points-paying position. They're too wide coming out of the chicane. It looks like potentially Dorado with higher straight line speed coming onto the straight. Yes, Dorado is ahead. coming into the final few corners now. And he will stay ahead. Demotes Pixels back down to P11. You see Bayliss now on the back of this battle here between Jim and Blah. Bayliss will want to make up for the absolute mess that happened at the start of the race. And it looks like they have pace. If it hadn't have been for the start, they could have been fighting right at the front. There's a red light now blinking on the back of Jim Bobster's Alfa Romeo as well, indicating they could be out of battery. Now Bayliss is past. Is Jim Bobster struggling there? Is there damage to the Alfa Romeo potentially after that collision with the Haas? These two are now back together. Scarlett and Broughton. Too wide. Scarlett taps the wall. Looks like Broughton might have the inside line. No, Scarlett's ahead coming into the chicane. Broughton now back ahead. Higher straight line speed than the Ferrari now by the looks of things. We know from the driver's channel that Broughton is using the same setup as your race leader D7, who is still pulling away from the pack on those mediums. 2.5 seconds now to second place. There's a nice few battles now spread out all across the midfield. There's this fight for third between Scarlett and Broughton. You've also got the fight between Blah Yapper, Bayliss and Jim Bobster, with Alexei almost on the back of that battle. There's a yellow flag in Sector 1. And it looks like that's the Haas of Scarlett that's had a moment there in their fight with Broughton. They've been demoted down to P5 now. Salmon Baker's got ahead into P4. That's Blah Yapper through now as well. We know from past experiences when the conditions are right and the car's working as they expect it to, Scarlett is one of the fastest drivers in this league and always able to fight at the front. The race is not over yet. We're 6 laps in, still 23 laps to go. Still a long way left in this race. Anything can happen, as we've already seen from the start. We see Scarlett closing down on that Haas in the braking zone, much later on the brakes, much more confident into the braking zones. Still the fight between Pixels and Dorado. Pixels back through into P10. We see Scarlett on the inside now into turn 1. Can they get past Blah Yapper? Side by side through the first corner. Still side by side, and Scarlett is almost ahead. They have the inside line, but Blah Yapper just holds them off. And a spin from Blah Yapper. There's a spin again through that centre section for Blah Yapper that brings Scarlett back up into P5, but they have Bayliss to worry about now. Bayliss charging very hard in P6, right on the back of Scarlett already. It looks like there's been a collision with Alexei as well. Alexei's spun. Oh no. An absolutely horrific start for the McLaren team. Both drivers getting spun during this race now. We see Bayliss closing on Scarlett now. Will he have DRS coming into the straight? He does indeed. He will pull up alongside Scarlett now, and he is ahead. Pulls right back in front of Scarlett now into the braking zone. They're still very close together, nose to tail now into the final few corners. Closing in on the Alpine of Salmon Baker. While the gap still extends at the front, 3 seconds and growing. This is probably one of the closest fights we have at the moment. We have a two-way, potentially a three-way fight incoming. That's Bailiffs past Scarlet still. Closing on Sam and Baker. There's a yellow flag again. It looks like Jim Bobster again through the second sector. Another off for the Alfa Romeo of Jim Bobster. Not a good start to the race for them either. We see Scarlet just starting to drop back a little bit. Bayliss still charging, closing through each corner, right on the back of that Alpine now. What can they do onto the straight? With DRS assistance, I imagine they'll be able to get past the Alpine, no problem. The Alpine takes a wide line to defend. DRS open for Bayliss in the McLaren, and he is passed. Sam and Baker still holding on. We see Apex now, the first of your front runners to pit. As we suspected, 8 laps on those soft tyres. That promotes Broughton into P2 and Bayliss into P3. There's a 3-second time penalty as well for IX Finnell in the Williams. Apex going onto the hards now. Potentially a one-stop for them. We'll see if they can manage it. I suspect the tyres will start going off towards the end. But with going on to hard compound tyres now, I suspect that's what they could be trying. Now we see Pixels, Dorado and Apex all in the fight for P8 now. Points for the Aston Martin driver as it stands. From the back of the grid to P8, a very nice recovery from FV Pixels. We see Apex closing now and past Dorado. Apex wasting no time at all, going for the move, potentially on Pixels as well. Pixels off the track and potentially into the wall. As the commentator's curse strikes again. That's Pixels back down to P10. Still trying to tag onto the back of Eldorado in the Mercedes to try and be towed along a little down this straight to keep with the mid-pack. Points on the board will be fantastic for the Aston, considering where they started. And that's Dorado straight lining the final braking zone. Dorado running straight off. Is that potential assistance there from the Aston Martin? It looked like potentially a late move there from Pixels, causing them to take avoiding action potentially. We'll see what comes of that later on. We see Apex now closing right onto the back of Jim Bobster once again as they make a charge through the pack after their first pit stop. The gap stands at almost 6 seconds now. That's a 3-second time penalty to Sass in the Aston. It's Apex to the outside. Round the outside of Jim Bobster in the Alfa Romeo goes Apex up into P7. Wasting no time getting those hard compound tyres fired up and ready. See a big slide from Scarlet there. Coming through the final few corners, closing down on the back of Sam and Baker now. 10 laps on those medium tyres. How much further are they going to try and extend their first stint before they come into the pits? The gap's starting to spread out now slightly as we approach the first round of pit stops for the majority of the drivers. We see Bayliss now still charging on those medium tyres after the spin in the first opening laps. Closing down on the back of that. Williams now in second place. The gap 2 seconds and falling currently. Looks like the front runners as well coming up on Sass in the Aston Martin to be lapped. An absolutely horrific race so far for the Aston driver. We see Apex closing on Blah-Yapper now. Gap just 1.6 seconds as it stands. Apex on the hards, Blah-Yapper on the mediums. I would suspect potentially a bit more pace now from Apex over Blah-Yapper. Tyres in that house potentially going off after 11 laps of hard racing. Fresh hards for Apex after an early pit stop off the soft compound tyre. And you see the gap under a second now. After the chicane, they will have DRS coming into the straight. I believe that'll be their best chance to pass if they don't get past already. DRS now, there's a yellow flag. It's one of the Ferraris. It looks like it could be Boise again in the Ferrari. Down in P15, not a good race from them either. As they get moving again, the yellow flag will clear. You see the gap decreasing now, under a second. As Broughton and D7 come diving into the pits. Bayliss will stay out. D7 onto the hards. I suspect the same for Broughton as well when they pit. And it is hard compound tyres for D7 and Broughton. Your top three, Bayliss, Salmon Baker and Scarlett all staying out on the medium compound tyre. Bayliss trying to pull a gap if possible. 6 seconds now between second place. They are charging. Coming up on one of the Astons now as well. And there's movement here as well. Jim Bobster versus Broughton just out of the pits. Not much temperature into those tyres yet. Apex now trying to close on this front group. You see the gap stands 3.5 seconds currently between Apex and D7. The later pit stop for D7. As he goes past Scarlett, who's still out on those medium tyres. Bayliss comes into the pits now. Scarlett stays out. Salmon into the pits. It's hard compound tyres for Bayliss. And for Salmon. Expect most drivers that started on the mediums will be doing a medium hard one stop. As we saw at the start of the predicted strategies, medium hard was the top strategy for a one stop. We see OJ English now 10 laps on those medium tyres, closing in on Jim Bobster in the Alfa Romeo. His teammate Salmon Baker just behind him, just pitted onto fresh hards. Is there going to be potential team orders in play here at Alpine? As it looks like Salmon potentially has the higher level of pace of the two Alpines here today. Bayliss in P5 now, chasing down Blah Yapper, who has stayed out. DRS is wide open for that McLaren as they go for the move. They'll have the inside line coming into the last corner, and they are past. As Scarlett now comes into the pits. That's D7 taking over the lead of the race once again. Apex into P2, Bayliss into P3. That'll be hards for Scarlett. As OJ and Blah Yapper and Jim Bobster now all come into the pits. It looks like Hausman will be staying out, potentially. 13 laps on those medium tyres. How much further are they going to extend? And that's a 3-second time penalty for the Mercedes of Eldorado. And I see that's potentially a purple sector 1 there for Bayliss in the McLaren. They are charging on these hard tyres. The recovery has been absolutely fantastic after the start. Still 3 drivers staying out. OJ, Hausman and Finnell in the Williams all staying out on those medium tyres. Everyone else has pitted at least once. Of your front runners, Apex was the earliest pitter. You see 6 laps now on those medium tyres. Still 14 laps left to go. D7 still with a massive gap out in front. A 6-second gap now. And that's a 3-second time penalty for Jim Bobster as well. And that is fastest lap for Bayliss in the McLaren. 1:31.1 on those hard tyres. As they close in on the front running pack. Just over a second now separates him and Apex. As they come up to lap one of the other Aston Martins. That's Hausman and OJ now both into the pits, and they've pitted for mediums. That's an odd strategy call for both of those. I expected hards potentially. Still, Finnell stays out. 13 laps on those mediums and counting. We see Bayliss now right on the back of Apex Miata. As they come through the chicane, what can they do? Bayliss, I expect, will have DRS with the potentially better exit there onto the straight. And it is DRS open for the McLaren. Apex moves to defend. Guarding off the inside, but I imagine it won't matter with the assistance of DRS. Apex pushes him right to the outside. They're too wide through the final sector. And Bayliss comes out ahead. As a yellow flag in Sector 2, and that's Jim Bobster in the wall. That's a virtual safety car again. Can we see what's happened to that Alfa Romeo? Potentially up somewhere at the chicane. Salmon now pits onto a fresh set of medium tyres, taking advantage of the virtual safety car to pit for a softer compound. They will fall down the order a bit, of course. This is only a virtual safety car, not a full safety car. The grid's travelling at a slightly reduced speed. And there's a drive-through penalty for Bayliss. Oh no. It's from bad to worse. From the McLaren driver, it's a drive-through penalty for your second place for speeding under the VSC. That is an absolute nightmare come true for the McLaren driver. Now we go back to green. The gap shrunk to just under 5 seconds now between Bayliss and D7 out in front. Bayliss will have 3 laps now to serve that drive-through penalty before a potential disqualification incoming. He's going to try and build as much of a gap to Apex as he can before he has to take that, because that will drop him down the order quite far. And I believe there's a battle going on here between both the Alpines and Houseman in the McLaren. Sam and Baker looking very racy so far on those fresh mediums. Houseman just keeping ahead in that Red Bull. As we suspected, the positions have been inverted. Sam and Baker now leads the Alpine pairing. Pixels back up to P10. Quite a lot of these gaps have now closed right up after that virtual safety car. With the reduced delta, drivers have closed right back up to each other, so we'll see a few more battles now through until the end. It's a DRS train now with the 2 Alpines and the Red Bull of Houseman in front in P7. We see a fastest lap from Houseman. It's a 1:30.7 from the Red Bull Reserve. A very nice lap indeed. Taking that fastest lap point away from Bayliss and the McLaren. It looks like the gap increasing in front as well, potentially, as both Alpines run a little bit wide there through the long left-hander. We see Alexei closing onto the back of Pixels now as well for P10. Battle for the last point. There's a 3-second penalty from Houseman. There's a yellow flag in Sector 1 as Bayliss comes into the pits to serve his drive-through. There's a caution in Sector 3 as well. Looks like Boise and the Ferrari potentially. Or was it Scarlet? It might have been Scarlet. It was. They're still going with no visible damage that I can see on that Ferrari, so unsure what caused the yellow flag there. They're still scrapping with Bar Yappa in P6. The 2 Alpines still line astern on lap 20 of 29. Penalty for Houseman in front as the gap stands will promote Salmon into P7. Alexei is past Pixels. Up into P10. What can Pixels do? The fight for the last point now. It looks like Pixels potentially dropping back a little bit there. Alexei with the 1 lap fresher tyres on that McLaren. Pull that over a second and a half already. Meanwhile, that gap's still increasing out front. 10 seconds now separates P1 and P2. D7 with an absolute dominant drive so far. Just driving away from the pack. Now Broughton's back into this as well. Bayliss serving the drive-through out into P4 just off the podium. Bayliss now coming back into this. Broughton, sorry, coming back into this. Closing on apex. Just over half a second the gap. Coming into the second sector now. With DRS open for the Williams driver. He will close in on Apex into the braking zone alongside. Apex left the inside, brakes slightly later, just holds that inside line to defend. Closes Broughton off at the Apex. Into the chicane they go, still nose to tail. That was very close there for Broughton, potentially a warning for track limits at the chicane. Onto the back straight they come. It will be DRS again for the Williams. This will be his second opportunity to pass. And here we go. There's another 3-second time penalty for Sass. And Broughton is passed. He will stay ahead. Oh, a bit of a slide there for Apex coming out of the final sector. Almost back end into the wall. Still the two Alpines absolutely glued together in 8th and 9th. Still, Salmon remains the better of the two. Still, Apex hanging on the back there of Broughton. Another 3-second time penalty for Sass. That's 9 seconds in penalties so far for the Aston driver. And it's Apex down the inside, back into P2. Apex caught Broughton by surprise there into the chicane. Broughton might have DRS again, or did Apex stay ahead for just long enough to keep it for himself? We see Bayliss in the background now closing on this front running pack again. Another battle between the Alpines still. Salmon Baker and OJ. Just 3/10 separate the two. Apex holds the inside line. They go too wide through the final complex of corners. Still, Apex is ahead. Broughton makes it ahead, holds the inside line there through the final couple of corners. Onto the main straight goes Broughton. Apex down the inside again though, back into P2, but he runs wide. He runs wide and lets the Williams right back through. That brings Bayliss right back into the battle now. Bayliss is through as well. Apex back down into P4 now. Bayliss back on the podium after that drive-through penalty. You have to wonder what could have been for the McLaren driver had they have not been spun at the beginning. Apex still hanging in there, under a second now from Bayliss. They might get DRS into this section. And they will. DRS wide open, closing in on the back of that McLaren. Just 7/10 the gap. 6/10 now, 4/10 as they come into the chicane. The gap is dropping. Apex and Bayliss both will get a second helping of DRS now as they come onto the back straight. What can they do against Broughton in P2? Can they close? I'm expecting a charge from both drivers here. Both drivers close right in on Broughton in the Williams, but he still stays ahead. The gap just 4/10 now between Bayliss and Broughton. 3/10. The gap still dropping. You see right on the back of the Williams now. See, ERS is gone for the Williams. The red light there blinking on the back of the car ahead. See, there's lap traffic ahead. That'll be Boise in the Ferrari. Both the drivers will have to contend with that as we come into the chicane. Bayliss is closing. Bayliss is on the inside. He's passed. Bayliss is through, past, up into P2 now. Here comes the fight back. Broughton and Apex now. P3 and 4 respectively. All trying to fight for that last spot on the podium. It'll be DRS for the two behind, who will both close in on Bayliss at this final braking zone. He does manage to stay ahead. Little lock up there for Broughton in the Williams. And that's a 3-second time penalty for Broughton. Track limits catching the drivers out again. As it stands, that'll promote Apex onto the podium, but it'll only drop Broughton to P4. So the next nearest car is Scarlett, who's 11 seconds back from Apex. We see Apex on the charge, closing right in. Having to take a bit of avoiding action there. Getting caught out by the early braking there of the Williams in front as another penalty comes in. 3-second time penalty to Finnell in the Williams. You see Broughton just holding the inside line, trying to defend against Apex. Apex takes the inside for the next corner and he is passed. Broughton right on the back of Apex still, into the chicane. Bayliss pulling away in front. A lot of curb there for the Red Bull of Apex. Broughton with DRS, back alongside Apex and past again into the final braking zone. As it stands, this fight will go down to the last lap. Bayliss has pulled a 2-second gap now on third place. Unfortunately, it is too little too late. The gap still holding in front, just over 10 seconds to D7, who has led this race almost lights to flag. No real bother there from D7 at all today. Nobody has been on that level of pace. That's another 3-second time penalty for SAS. That'll take them up to 12 seconds now. We see Ben Hausman now closing on the back of Blyapper and Scarlett. Hausman on the mediums, although he does have a penalty. And there's a yellow flag in Sector 3. I believe it will be the Astons now. The two Astons of SAS and Pixels now stuck right together. We see Ben Hausman now, DRS open, closing on Blyapper, trying to make a charge. To the inside, what can they do into the final braking zone? They hold the inside and they are past Blyapper. Through into P6 they go, your Season 3 champion. With DRS open now, closing in on P5. Hunting down Scarlett in the Ferrari. As we have just 2 laps remaining. Blyapper not getting deterred, still stuck onto the back of Hausman in the Red Bull. Hausman on the softer compound tyres of the 3, being on those mediums. And that's a 5-second penalty for Alexi for speeding in the pit lane. things go from bad to worse for the McLaren driver as they pit onto the soft, presumably to try and take that fastest lap point for the McLaren team to secure them as many points as they can towards the constructors' fight. We see side by side now, Hausmann. There's contact between Hausmann and Blayappa. There's no front wing left on that Red Bull. There's been contact into the chicane. We just missed the contact as the camera angles changed, but I saw a front wing go flying. So they'll just pull to the inside just to get out of the way. Let Blayappa back through, and presumably they will bolt on a set of soft tyres and get that front wing changed. And they do. Still a fight between the two Williams, Salmon and OJ. Yellow flag in Sector 1, it's one of the Ferraris. Potentially Boise in the Ferrari, or it might have been Scarlett, we didn't see. Another 3-second time penalty for Sass. That'll be 15 seconds in penalties now. Hausmann and Alexei both on the soft compound tyre. Apex still scrapping it out with Broughton for P3. Just 8/10ths the gap as they come into the chicane onto the back straight. A fight between Scarlett and Blayappa as well, as we see a yellow flag in Sector 2. And that's Scarlett there that causes the yellow flag. Scarlett's car there being ghosted for whatever reason. Not entirely sure why that's happened. Potentially a disconnect for them, as they still appear to be ghosted. They'll pull to the inside. They're now down to P6. There's Salmon Baker behind in P7 who's closing. Another 3-second time penalty for Finnell as well. Battle's starting to calm down now a little as we go on to the final lap. The gap closed just a little out front. Still, D7 leads from Bayliss from Broughton for your podium. Broughton still with that 3-second time penalty, so if Apex can keep in within 3 seconds of the Williams, he will get promoted to B3 after the fact. Although Apex undoubtedly will want to win it on track. There's a yellow flag in Sector 3, potentially one of the Williams drivers. It's Alexei with the fastest lap, 1:29.7 from the McLaren driver. The fastest lap point now safely in McLaren's hands. Broughton and Apex close now. Just 6/10ths the gap. As they come into the final section one last time, what can they do? And it will be Apex promoted onto the podium. He would have wanted to win it on the track, but a podium is a podium. After the absolute mess that was last week's race, that is redemption day undoubtedly for them. As the Alpines now cross the line in formation, it is still Salmon to lead OJ. As Hausmann takes the fastest lap as well. On the last lap, it's 1:28.9 from the Red Bull of Ben Hausmann, stealing that fastest lap point from McLaren at the death. Very well done. And Alexei with a 5-second penalty there for not serving the 5-second penalty they got for speeding in the pits. Wow, what a race that was. Your driver of the day is Salmon Baker. There we are, your podium sitters. It's D7 taking the win from Bayliss from Apex. P4 is Broughton. P5 running out the top 5. Bly Yapper in the Haas. The two Alpines, Salmon Baker and OJ English in 6th and 7th. Ben Hausman, your Season 3 champion, on his return in P8 with the fastest lap. Alexi in P9 and Scarlett to round out your top 10. We have Finnell P11, Pixels P12, Dorado P13, Boise in the Ferrari P14, Sass in P15, and your retirement, Jim Bobster in the Alfa Romeo. Very unfortunate retirement from them as they look to have decent pace today. Well, that was a brilliant race indeed. Lots of scraps all the way through that race. Battles in the top 3, but an absolutely dominant drive there, undoubtedly from D7. From second place on the grid to the win. Pretty much lights to flag.